Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for tuning in to Smart 24 TV. You're watching the POLICON, where we discuss politics and economics. My name is Jerome Paul Sonko, and it's yet a fresh episode of the show where we analyze political and economic matters. A happy new year to you as well. We're coming to you live, and of course giving you all these details in the heart of Kampala. Plot 42 Nile Avenue is where you are definitely going to be getting us Smart 24. On GOTV, we are channel 394, DSTV is channel 372, and you can definitely get us more via YouTube on Smart 24 TV Live. Well, today we are discussing more and analyzing Uganda's informal sector and the law, trying to understand for the Ugandans who fall in the informal sector of the economy, how do you tap into the law, and of course, how does the law impact onto the business? Now, if you're to just a simple breakdown, the informal economy constitutes 85% of Uganda's labor force. Now, this means that the majority of the population is depending on and their livelihoods basically under the informal sector for survival. Now, the informal economy does contribute over 50% of Uganda's GDP, and this is continuously revealing how significant this is to the economy. And to joining us this particular time to discuss more about the same matter of the law and Uganda's informal sector, I do have Simon Peter Chinobe, who is working with Otis Advocates, and he's a partner in the infrastructure and construction team at the same. So many thanks for joining us, Council.
Thank you for having me.
All right.
I'm glad to be here, and a happy new year to everybody that's listening to us.
All right, thank you very much for giving us your time, Council. Council, if you are to briefly tell a viewer how the law, for example, because most of us feel those who are working in the formal sector are more attached to the law than the people in the informal sector, simply because most of them really don't care about what the law has for them.
Well, everybody, whether you're in the formal or informal sector, should be interested in the provisions of the law. Knowledge is very important. And it doesn't matter which sector you're in, the law applies to all of us collectively. For instance, the clauses on employment, the Employment Act will apply to you whether you're in the informal or formal sector, the Income Tax Act, among others. So I think it's important for everybody to acquaint themselves with the law to avoid incidents of getting into trouble with the law and the law enforcers.
Okay, and if we are to look at this now, are there limitations for those in the informal sector?
There are no limitations. The law applies the same across the board.
Okay.
If you read the Constitution, you realize that we are all equal under the law and nobody is above the law. That means that the same way the law applies to me is the same way it applies to you, is the same way it applies to somebody else, regardless of sector. The only exceptions you may get to enjoy, especially if you're in the informal sector, will relate to tax law. For instance, the tax regime that governs the informal sector is not the same tax regime that governs the formal sector.
Okay, how is that?
So you'll find that at times the threshold for those in the informal sectors does not fall within the taxable income ambit.
Okay.
So save for those differences, again, which are set up by the law, you will not find a lot of differences in applicability of the law. The same rights an employee enjoys in the informal sector are the same rights an employee in the
formal sector
enjoys. Yes.
And speaking of the tax regimes here, Council, you get to realize we have a challenge of the fact that some of the people working in the informal sector have less awareness about the available taxes. And then unlike the people working in the formal sector, or what some people term as the big boys, but when you look at that, where do you think the issue is? Is it lack of awareness because they don't want, or it is?
I think first there is ignorance on what tax is about. there is an assumption that you are better far away from the taxman than you are closer. And it's historical. Everybody runs away from the taxman until you can no longer avoid him. But I think that concept is bad. It's very important to understand your tax obligations, your tax benefits, and for your business to grow, you should be able to pay your taxes in time and as required. There is also the general feel of, we talked about ignorance, we can also talk about complexity, that many of our people who are in the informal sector are mainly illiterate. And even the literate ones are not literate in tax issues.
Tax issues, yes.
And so because of the complexity of tax matters, many people seem to shun away from them and to avoid them. But that's why you have education centers set up by Uganda Revenue Authority. That's why you have lawyers set up both in the pro bono arm and in any other arm to ensure that you are able to access this information and education at a minimal or meager cost.
Okay.
So reach out to the lawyers, reach out to Uganda Law Society, for instance, that has pro bono lawyers,
okay,
and these other legal aid entities. Reach out to URA that has an education and resource center to better understand this tax system, how it works, your obligation and your benefits. At times you may not be eligible to pay tax because you've made a tax loss, what would classify as a tax loss. But because you're compliant in terms of filing returns and others, you get a tax benefit. That means whoever has been, for instance, withholding money to pay tax in terms of VAT and the 6% withholding accrues a benefit to you that you can use as a tax credit. So these things are good, but the small and medium scale enterprise, the informal sector, needs to embrace some of these things.
All right, Council, when you look at the fact that the ignorance of the law is never a defense in any way for anybody. So for example, you've been in the law and all these for over 20 years. Now, if we're to look back, why do you think the challenges with Ugandans and getting aware of the law or understanding Uganda's law systems? Because we all know the kinds of laws we have are one of the best across the continent. We keep on praising the idea, but saying that implementation becomes the issue. What do you think the challenge is?
So implementation is a different thing.
Okay.
Because implementation is the obligation of government, not for the private citizen.
Oh, okay.
The role of the private citizen is to follow.
The laws.
Implementation and follow-up and sensitization is the role by government and civil society.
Okay.
The bigger problem we have as Ugandans and Africans generally is the absence of the culture to read, the absence of the thirst to learn. And for as long as you do not read, you do not want to learn. There will always be that vacuum. And I think for you to cure that vacuum, you need to encourage people to read. And if they cannot learn how to read, you need to sensitize them. Because the sensitization program or process simplifies things for those that don't want to read, those that don't know where to find information, and for the illiterate that may desire to read but do not have the ability so to do. Our illiteracy levels are also still high. So you have to understand that very few Africans have the ability
to read and the thirst to learn.
So the role for we who can read and for government is to make sure that that information is compressed and translated in a mechanism that can be easily understood by the majority of the population who are illiterate.
Okay, when you look at the majority, when you mention illiterates, most of them fall under the informal sector, though we also have the literates who are there, and you did say the literates who are there, some of them are actually having less information about the taxes available. Have you ever in any way encountered some of the case scenarios where the informal sector, someone is reporting a case to the courts of law that, well, and it's actually fair enough if I'm to use the word, for lack of a better word, I should say, and they are clearly saying this and this is not happening right for me, or the government policies in one way are not fitting into my agenda.
Now, who makes policy? Policy is made by the Parliament of the Republic of Uganda.
On behalf of the Ugandans.
On behalf of Ugandans. Parliamentarians are elected, and every entity is represented.
Oh, right.
So I think the thing for most Ugandans is you need to know what is happening as a going concern. If a bill or a policy is being debated and discussed, one that concerns you, one that affects you, it is always wise that you reach out to your member of parliament or leader to be able to pronounce your needs and how the said legislation shall affect you. Secondly, most of these, and this is very good, most of the industries in Uganda are now organized. Lawyers have their umbrella body statutory called the Uganda Law Society. I've seen most of these SMEs
coming up. They have a federation.
Yes, they have a federation. There is Kasita.
There is Uzia.
There is Kwagalana. There is
FSMEs.
There are all these many. And I think that block body can be a very good. You even have trade unions, you know, among others. And those entities can be used as a voice for these small and medium scale industries to amplify their needs, to amplify their disgruntlement, so that policy can be shaped around that. So those should be used together with the parliamentary system.
To do with the minimum wage. There are members of parliament who want to pass the bill, the minimum wage bill, before parliament. And the reason is most of them are actually looking at the cover. Why I'm saying they're looking at the cover, they're only looking at the level of the fact that when you're working for an employer, at least you should know the amount of money that you will least expect from them. Now, when you mention it from the perspective of the law, I wish to know as well, to understand, from your personal opinion, if at all it does pass as a minimum age law or act in the country, what do you think it will solve? Or we are, like you've said, or we are still young to go for it?
I think first, the countries that have adopted the minimum wage have been known to have a reduction in exploitation. You reduce employee,
Okay.
employer exploitation. But at times you cure one vice, only to create another. So you've had increased human trafficking in areas that have tried to fight to deal with the issue of minimum wage. So then I get in people who will do it for cheaper, but bring them in illegally.
Okay.
So I guess it's something we need to wait out and see,
Okay.
and then deal with the consequences as they happen, positive or negative.
Okay, and before we go in for a break, I need to know, in Rwanda, just recently, 4 days ago, it was around on the 4th of January, not 4 days ago. On the 4th of January, in Rwanda, they issued out, it is actually, now the law is actually ongoing. I wouldn't say practically a law, but they decided that the working hours were stretched to only 8 hours, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And some of the private sector players believe that with that kind of introduction, it may limit the level of productivity. While on the other hand, some people are saying the workers will be more effective. If, for example, such a kind of situation is brought into Uganda, will it be a good move?
Well, under the Employment Act, you already have that. The official working hours, there is a computation of the number of hours. I think there are 48 hours a week. And when you compute, it actually translates to 9 to 5.
Though ours is from 8 lately in most of the companies.
That means if you start at 8, for you to get the 48 hours computed by law under the Employment Act, you have to stop working at 4. Yes. Anything beyond 4 becomes
an overdue. Yeah.
So the Ugandan employment law is okay. It's already regulated that working hours. It is just that those hours may be shifted. They are not static.
Depending on the company.
Depending on the company and depending on the kind of work you do.
Okay.
So if I work 9 to 5, another company may require me to work 1 a.m. to perhaps 4 a.m. in the morning. So it depends on the kind of work you do, but the standard is that you should not work, I think, beyond 48 hours.
Oh, okay. And of course, like you've mentioned, but you get to realize that most of the companies here, again, it takes us back to the exploitation, and of which is happening in the informal sector. Because for the formal sector, because everyone does know their regulations and what they're supposed to do, and the rights of the workers and the employees, it goes back to the informal sector. Now, as for the people who know less about the law, what would be the advice you would give to them?
Read, get a lawyer. Read, get a lawyer. That is my advice.
But getting a lawyer is costly. To most of the people are saying it is very costly.
You know, there is a saying that if you feel getting a lawyer is expensive, try ignorance. So most of this exploitation happens because of ignorance, and you lose because of ignorance. Imagine if you had gone for, some legal advice, it would have been cheaper on your side. But also, not all lawyers are for pay. You have pro bono lawyers. For instance, Uganda Law Society has a robust legal aid clinic that does that. And there are so many entities that provide legal aid. If you're poor and you feel paying a lawyer is expensive, go to a legal aid, pro bono lawyer. Yes.
Okay. On a scale, what is the red card for a lawyer? For example, in a case like violence at work, you're reporting such a case.
Well, we have a billing system that is governed by the advocate's remuneration and taxation of costs. Okay. So you need to read to find the scale, depending on the complexity. There are so many factors considered. Complexity, time spent, cause of action, value of subject matter, among others. There is no blanket figure because the circumstances differ from person to person.
All right, now for the viewers out there, we're discussing and analyzing Uganda's informal sector and the law. One of my keywords that I've actually picked from what the senior counsel has been saying is read and have thirst to learn. So either way, before the law actually hits you, you really need to know something about it before you go out and maybe report a case or something. Well, after the break, we will be back, and this time around, we'll be discussing protection of harassment and violence at work. And then we as well look at some of the laws that extend protection to the informal and formal sector. You're watching the POLICON, where we discuss politics and economics. This is Smart 24 TV, where we drive your business.